My wife, Emily, cheated on me with my stepbrother, Brian, and ended up getting pregnant. When I asked for a paternity test, she went ahead and terminated the pregnancy. Afterward, I told her parents everything, and they decided to cut her off from her inheritance. I am James, a 34-year-old man, and Emily, who is 29, and I have been married for 2 years. Our relationship had always been straightforward. We met at a work function several years back, became good friends, and over time, those feelings developed into something deeper. After being friends for a couple of years, we started dating. We spent 3 years in a happy relationship before I proposed. In total, we have been together for nearly 6 years. Our life together had never been particularly complicated. Whether during the dating phase or after marriage, we hardly had any serious arguments. Emily is beautiful, intelligent, and someone I always thought of as a great life partner. I worked hard to be a good husband, and for a long time, it felt like we were genuinely happy. Then, 6 months ago, my stepbrother Brian, who was 28, got fired from his job. Instead of immediately looking for another position, he decided to take some time off to discover himself. Brian has always been impulsive and unpredictable. Convincing him to attend college and finish a degree was a monumental effort for my dad and stepmom. He is the kind of person who comes up with crazy ideas that need to be talked down, but getting fired for showing up drunk to a work meeting was a new low, even for him. After that incident, he claimed he was ready to turn things around and quit drinking altogether. Although I doubted his commitment and figured it was just another one of his half-baked plans, I tried to support him for my father's sake. My parents divorced when I was young, and my dad remarried Brian's mother when I was a teenager. A couple of months ago, Brian asked if he could stay at my place for a few weeks because he wanted to explore New York. I was hesitant, but my dad and stepmom pressured me to let him stay. I felt cornered and eventually agreed after consulting with Emily. She said she was okay with it, so I reluctantly allowed him to move in. When Brian moved in, I laid out some ground rules. I told him no bringing guests over and no disrupting our routines, especially our sleep schedule. To my surprise, he agreed without much fuss. For the first few days, Brian was out almost every night, often staying out until the early hours of the morning. I even saw him coming in as late as 7 a.m. while I was getting ready for work. Outside of that, he seemed polite, joined us for dinner, and even cooked a few meals for Emily and me. I was genuinely surprised because this was not the chaotic Brian I had known my whole life. During his second week staying with us, Emily and I had planned a weekend trip to Las Vegas for some work I had scheduled there. We asked Brian to look after the apartment while we were away. Unfortunately, the night before we were supposed to leave, Emily came down with a nasty stomach flu. We were both upset but hoped she would feel better by the next morning. When the morning came, she was even worse, and there was no way she could travel. I tried to reschedule the work-related trip but was unable to, so I reluctantly went alone. I felt terrible leaving her like that, but I figured Brian would be there to help if her condition got worse. He promised to stay in and cook for her while I was gone. I assured Emily I would be back early Saturday morning. Looking back, I cannot believe I did not see what was coming. When I returned the next day, Emily was feeling much better. I did not think much of it at first, but in the days that followed, I began to notice changes. Brian, who used to be out all the time, suddenly started staying home more. He would not leave for several days at a time. When I asked him if everything was all right, he shrugged it off, saying he was trying to save money. I accepted his answer, but other things began to stand out. One day, I came home early from work and found Emily already there. She said she had left work early because of a headache but had forgotten to let me know. Another time, I returned home early again and saw Emily and Brian entering the apartment together. When I asked, she claimed they had just run into each other outside the building. These incidents could have been coincidences, but I could not shake the uneasy feeling that something was off. I had never doubted Emily's loyalty before, and while Brian had always been reckless, I did not think he could do something so despicable. Yet, my gut kept telling me otherwise. Without any evidence, I knew I could not make accusations. It would cause unnecessary chaos in my family. So, I took the simplest approach I could think of. I asked Brian how long he planned to stay with us. I told him it had been nice having him around, but it might be time for him to start considering his next steps. Thankfully, he got the hint and said he would move out by the end of the week. Emily was present during this conversation, but she stayed silent the entire time. I found her lack of reaction unsettling. After Brian moved out, I tried to focus on my marriage and forget about my doubts. Things seemed to return to normal, and I started convincing myself that I had been overthinking. I felt guilty for even imagining that Emily could betray me after all the years we had been together. But then, about 2 weeks ago, we found out Emily was pregnant. 2 months pregnant, to be exact. 2 months ago, Brian had still been living with us. My stomach turned. I will give you a little more context about myself. I am a few years older than my wife, Rachel, as I mentioned earlier. By the time I hit 30, I was ready to settle down and start a family of my own. From the moment Rachel and I began dating, I knew she was the one I wanted to marry. I envisioned us building a life together, raising a family, and growing old side by side. But Rachel, being a bit younger, was not ready to take that step yet. She said she needed a few more years to prepare for such a big responsibility. Even though her decision was not what I wanted, I supported her. We decided we would wait until she turned 30 to try for kids. Until then, we were always cautious. Rachel could not take hormonal birth control because her body reacted badly to it, so we relied on other methods of protection. We made sure to be extremely careful every single time. Of course, I understand that accidents can happen. But this situation just felt wrong. The timing was far too suspicious to ignore. When Rachel told me she wanted to keep the baby, she sounded so certain, so sure that this was a good thing. She told me that even though it was unplanned, we should embrace it and feel excited. Under different circumstances, I would have been thrilled. I had wanted children for years. But instead of feeling happy, I was crushed. I tried my best to put on a brave face around Rachel, but deep down, I was overwhelmed with dread and confusion. I could not shake off the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I could not talk to anyone about what I was going through. I did not want to be judged, and I certainly did not want to open up to the wrong person. So, for a week, I kept everything bottled up. I was in complete agony, trapped in my own mind. Eventually, I realized I could not go on like that. I needed answers, even if it meant facing some harsh truths. One evening, while we were having dinner, I decided to confront her. I could hardly eat. My stomach was in knots as I rehearsed the words in my head. Finally, I just came out with it. I told Rachel I had to ask her something important, something that had been weighing on me. She looked concerned and asked what it was. My voice shook as I apologized for even bringing it up, but I asked her if the baby she was carrying was really mine. The color drained from her face. She was stunned for a moment before her expression shifted to pure rage. Rachel's face turned red as she started shouting, calling me a monster for even questioning her loyalty. She said she had always been faithful and could not believe I would accuse her of something so terrible. I told her where my doubts came from. The fact that she was exactly 2 months pregnant, the same amount of time since Brian had moved out, was just too much of a coincidence. This only made her angrier. She shouted louder, her voice breaking as she accused me of being cruel and paranoid. I stayed calm, even though I felt my own frustration building. I told her how much this doubt had been eating away at me. I explained the little things I had noticed during Brian's stay that made me uneasy, and how I had tried to push those thoughts away but could not. After a while, she stopped yelling. Rachel took a deep breath and said she understood why I felt the way I did. But she told me I needed to have faith in her and in our marriage. I apologized to her again and told her I wished I could trust her fully, but the thoughts in my head were impossible to ignore. I said that for my own peace of mind, I needed a paternity test after the baby was born. I could see how much this hurt her, and I did not expect her to take it well. But her reaction was beyond anything I had imagined. The mere mention of a paternity test sent her into a complete meltdown. She accused me of humiliating her, of doubting her character without cause. I tried to explain that this was not about humiliating her, but about giving me the reassurance I needed to move forward. But the more I talked, the angrier she got. She told me I was cruel and said she could not believe I was doing this to her. Finally, I told her that this was not a request, it was an ultimatum. Either she agreed to the test, or I did not see how we could stay together. That seemed to catch her off guard. She said she needed time to think about it. That night, we slept in separate rooms. The next morning, we did not speak. We went about our routines as if the other person did not exist. The whole day at work, I could not concentrate. My mind kept replaying the argument and imagining all the worst-case scenarios. That entire week, Rachel avoided me. She started coming home late, and every time I tried to talk to her, she would get angry or shut me down. Eventually, I gave up trying. What I did not realize was that she was planning something behind my back. Last Thursday, I woke up and realized Rachel had not come home the night before. I texted her multiple times, but she did not respond. I was too upset to focus at work, so I went home early, hoping she would be there. But as the hours passed and she still had not shown up, I began to panic. I called her assistant, hoping to figure out where she was. That is when I learned she had taken 2 personal days. Her assistant was surprised I did not know about it. My worry turned into fear. I called a few of her friends, but none of them had heard from her either. In desperation, I called Rachel's mother. My mother-in-law was just as worried as I was when I told her what was going on. She promised to try to reach Rachel and said we would contact the police if she did not turn up soon. Then, about 30 minutes later, Rachel finally called me. She sounded calm, almost annoyed, as she told me she was fine and just needed some time to fix things. I asked where she had been, but she brushed it off and said she would come home the next morning. Rachel said she would be back the next morning and then hung up. I went to bed feeling frustrated and deeply upset. I even started to wonder if I should take some time away from her to clear my head. But little did I know, things were about to take an even wilder turn. The next morning, Rachel woke me up. She seemed unusually cheerful, which caught me off guard. Still groggy, I asked her about where she had been the day before. With a smile on her face, she told me she had been fixing a problem. What she said next completely blindsided me, even after all the worst-case scenarios I had been imagining. I asked her to explain what she meant, and she said, "This pregnancy has been filling your head with doubts and tearing us apart. So, I fixed it. I got an abortion to save our marriage." She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Now you don't have to worry about anything. We can have a fresh start." For the first time in my life, I felt truly floored. I was stunned. I just sat there, staring at her, trying to process what she had just said. I asked her if she was joking, but she calmly assured me she was completely serious. She added that now I could finally relax and stop letting my silly doubts get in the way of our relationship. That was it. That was my breaking point. I could not believe what I was hearing. I stood up, stared at her for a few moments, and then walked out of the room. I was afraid that if I stayed even a second longer, I might completely lose it. She started to follow me, but I turned back and told her, in no uncertain terms, to stay away from me. My tone must have been sharp enough because she stopped right in her tracks. As I left the apartment building, I immediately called my lawyer. I told her everything and said I wanted to file for divorce right away. I made it clear that I did not want Rachel to get a single penny of my money. We scheduled a meeting for the next morning to start working on the paperwork. After that, I called Brian. I wanted to hear it directly from him. I asked where he was, and he said he was in Atlanta. I told him I was divorcing Rachel and asked him to come clean about their affair. There was a long silence on the other end of the call before he finally muttered an apology. That was all the confirmation I needed. I hung up the phone, knowing there was no turning back. That night, I checked into a hotel. I needed space to think and prepare myself for what was coming. The next morning, I met with my lawyer and laid everything out for her, the infidelity, the abortion, all of it. She told me that getting a clean divorce without alimony might be tricky, but because Rachel had a good job and was clearly at fault, we had a strong case. Honestly, I did not even care about the money. This was about principle. I was done with Rachel. The person I thought I knew, the woman I had loved and built a life with, turned out to be someone completely different. I could not believe I had wasted 6 years of my life, sacrificing my own dreams and plans to support hers, only for her to betray me like this. After the meeting, I called Rachel's assistant to confirm she was at work. She was. I lied, saying I was planning a surprise for her, and asked her not to mention my call. Then, I went home, packed up as many of Rachel's belongings as I could fit into 3 suitcases, and left them outside the apartment door. I also called a locksmith to change all the locks. I did not want her in the apartment ever again. Once that was done, I packed an overnight bag for myself and returned to the hotel. By the time I finished everything, it was nearly 5 p.m., and I was physically and emotionally drained. As soon as I got back to the hotel, I fell onto the bed and passed out. When I woke up, my phone was ringing. It was Rachel, of course. I decided to give her the same cold silence she had given me when she got the abortion without telling me. She called me repeatedly and sent countless texts, but I ignored them all. I had nothing left to say to her. After about an hour of non-stop calls, she finally gave up. Or so I thought. A little while later, I got a message from Brian. He told me Rachel had reached out to him, asking if I had spoken to him. He admitted to her that I knew everything and told her it was over. He apologized again, but I could not care less. I did not even bother responding to him. At this point, I started thinking about my next steps. I wanted to ensure there was no way Rachel could manipulate the situation to her advantage. But then, I made a decision that, in hindsight, might have been a bit too far. I was hurt, humiliated, and furious, and I wanted her to face the consequences of her actions. Rachel comes from a very traditional Southern family. They have always had strong opinions about family values, and her parents had been pressuring us to have kids since the day we got married. For years, I stood by Rachel's side at family gatherings, defending our decision to wait. I never told them that the delay was because of her. So, I called her mother. Calmly, I explained everything: how Rachel had cheated on me with Brian, how she had gotten pregnant, and how she had secretly gotten an abortion. Her mother was mortified. At first, she refused to believe me, but I told her Brian had already confessed, and I had proof of the pregnancy and the abortion. I suggested she ask Rachel for an explanation. I knew this would blow up, and I did not have to wait long. Rachel started calling me incessantly, furious at me for telling her family. I ignored her for a while, but when she refused to stop, I finally picked up. She was livid, accusing me of ruining her life for no reason and saying she had nowhere to go. I told Rachel she was free to check into any hotel she wanted, but I made it clear she was not to bother me. I also informed her that she would be hearing from my lawyer soon and that any communication between us would now go through legal channels. I reassured her I would get the rest of her belongings packed and sent to any location she requested. Rachel then told me something unexpected: that her parents were furious with her. They had completely disowned her, stating that she was no longer welcome in the family and could forget about ever inheriting a cent from them. This surprised me, even coming from her traditional family. I expected them to be upset, but not to go as far as cutting her off entirely. I kept my reaction to myself. I told Rachel that her actions had led to this and that whatever her parents decided was not my concern. She retaliated by calling me petty and immature, saying I had ruined her life by dragging her family into our problems. She said she now had no one left to turn to. I responded bluntly, "I could not care less about you," and then hung up. She began bombarding me with texts, calling me every name in the book and vowing to take every penny I had, claiming she would make me regret this. I ignored her. Later that day, I received a call from Rachel's father. He apologized for his daughter's behavior and told me he was ashamed of what she had done. He explained that they were done allowing her to get away with her mistakes and hoped this situation would teach her a hard lesson. He asked me for the doctor's reports and pregnancy documentation, which I happily shared with him. After that conversation, I sat alone, thinking about everything that had happened. Rachel continued texting me relentlessly, and I briefly considered blocking her. However, a small part of me wondered if I had gone too far by involving her parents. I did not regret locking her out of my apartment or pursuing a divorce, but I felt conflicted about how severe the consequences were for her. Update 1. I want to thank everyone who reached out with support and advice. Hearing your stories helped me feel less isolated, and they gave me some much-needed reassurance about how I handled this situation. The divorce process has been rough, as expected. Rachel has been uncooperative and is determined to get alimony, despite having no real grounds for it. We have been trying to reach an agreement to avoid going to court, knowing how messy things can get. However, Rachel seems more focused on saving face and fueling her ego than on being practical. Looking back, I am so grateful I acted quickly and kicked her out of the apartment. I still have the ultrasound documents and pregnancy test, which would have been hard to retrieve had she taken them. I have also been speaking to Brian about the situation. As angry as I am at him, he has surprisingly agreed to cooperate. He even said he would testify if necessary. He has avoided all contact with Rachel and blocked her on every platform. Brian has apologized for his actions. While his apology means nothing to me personally, I do appreciate that he is not making things worse by denying the affair. I could not help but ask him about the details. He admitted the affair began the weekend I was in Las Vegas and continued throughout his stay. He also confessed that they met a few times after he moved out. He claimed he did not know about the pregnancy or the abortion. I know Brian's willingness to cooperate is largely due to my father's financial support. His savings are gone, and my dad has made it clear that Brian will be completely cut off if he causes more trouble. My father also admitted the only reason he has not severed ties with Brian yet is because his testimony might be crucial if the divorce gets complicated. It has not been easy holding back my anger toward Brian, but I know I need him to act responsibly if things escalate. On the bright side, I am finally back in my apartment. I have no idea where Rachel is now, and frankly, I do not care. The apartment has been in my name for years, long before I married her, so I am confident I will not lose it. That is all for now. I am bracing myself for the divorce to become even uglier. I will update you all once things settle down a bit. Update 2. I am officially divorced. It has been 6 months since my last update, and a lot has happened. At first, Rachel made the process as difficult as possible. But after several pre-trial hearings, depositions, and settlement conferences, it became clear that a trial would end badly for her. Brian gave his deposition under oath, and we presented solid evidence of her pregnancy and the abortion. We even brought in our OBGYN, who confirmed everything. Rachel's own deposition revealed inconsistencies and a demeanor that did not work in her favor. Brian's deposition confirmed everything we suspected. While his apology still means nothing to me, his testimony was a vital piece of evidence. To make matters worse for Rachel, they had taken intimate photos during their affair, which Brian still had on his phone. This made it impossible for her to deny the truth. As we moved into settlement conferences, Rachel's lawyers must have realized the alimony claims were futile. Given her high-paying job and the undeniable evidence of her infidelity, they could not make a solid case for her demands. We were willing to settle things amicably, but I was not going to let her take advantage of me. Eventually, Rachel conceded. She agreed to waive any claims for alimony, and we reached a fair settlement. She will keep her personal belongings, and we divided our joint assets equitably. The settlement ensures we will not have any further entanglements moving forward. I cannot express how relieved I am that this ordeal is over. That said, I cannot help but feel like I wasted 6 years of my life. I sacrificed my dreams of starting a family and being a husband for someone who threw it all away for nothing. Thank you to everyone who supported me throughout this process. To anyone going through something similar, stay strong and lean on your support system, it does get better. As the divorce proceedings moved into the settlement phase, the tension was palpable. Rachel's lawyers initially pushed for alimony, but it did not take long for them to realize that this fight was a losing battle. Given her well-paying job and the undeniable evidence of her infidelity, there was no way her demands would hold up in court. I was willing to resolve things amicably, but I had no intention of being taken advantage of. Eventually, Rachel relented. She agreed to waive any claims for alimony, and we finalized a settlement. The agreement ensured she would not receive anything beyond her personal belongings and her fair share of our joint assets. Considering her limited contributions to our marriage, the terms were more than reasonable. I cannot describe the relief I felt when the agreement was signed. Avoiding a prolonged and messy trial spared me from more financial and emotional strain. Now, with the divorce finalized, Rachel has no claim over my assets, and we are both free to move on with our lives without further entanglements. But even with everything settled, I cannot shake the overwhelming sense of regret. The marriage, the sacrifices, the years I poured into building a life with her, it all feels like such a colossal waste of time. I derailed my own plans, my dreams of starting a family, all for someone who threw it all away so recklessly. I want to thank everyone who supported me and shared their advice. Your encouragement was invaluable during this difficult time. To anyone facing similar struggles, I urge you to stay strong and lean on your support network. It truly does get better. Update 3. I am not sure if anyone is still following this, but it has been a few months since my last update. Earlier today, I received a call from my dad, and what he told me left me reeling. Apparently, Brian and Rachel are seeing each other again. I have not spoken to either of them since the divorce, so I had no idea that Brian had found a new job in the city and moved back. It seems that was all it took to reignite whatever they had. Somehow, Rachel has forgotten all the insults she hurled at him during the divorce. Hearing this news, I felt disgusted and humiliated all over again. It is hard not to feel like a complete fool. My dad told me he has made it abundantly clear to Brian and to my stepmother that he wants nothing to do with him anymore. At least I know my dad has my back in all of this. Honestly, I just want to put this entire chapter behind me. I hope this is the last time I ever hear about Rachel or Brian. For my own peace of mind, I need to move forward and leave them in the past where they belong. That is all I have for now. Thank you again to everyone who has supported me along the way. I do not plan to provide any more updates unless something significant happens. Take care.